So good afternoon everyone, welcome to the Bronte Festival of Women's Writing, and this year's theme is Web of Childhood. And so we couldn't, I guess, have a theme like that and not have someone like Jacqueline come and speak to us today. I have to admit, I haven't slept for about a week because I've been so excited about this. It's just magical, and I can see from all the smiling faces how many people are, I can just feel the buzz in the room. So although she doesn't need an introduction, I'm going to introduce Jacqueline to you. And then Alina, a very special young guest who is actually going to do the interview. So it's an extra special day. So, a lady who needs no introduction, but we're going to try and do one that isn't 18 pages long. So, since her debut novel in 1969, Dame Jacqueline has written over 100 books. When she first began writing, she completed several crime novels before dedicating herself to children's books. She then had mixed success with around 40 books before her breakout fame in 1991 with the one you'll all know, The Story of Tracy Beaker. In a 2003 poll, 4 of her books were ranked amongst the 100 most popular in the UK. She has been awarded many prizes, from the Guardian Prize to the Smarties Prize to the Blue Peter People's Choice Award, and also the British Book Award twice. In June 2002, she was appointed OBE for Services to Literacy in Schools, and from 2005 to 2007, she served as the 4th Children's Laureate. In the 2008 New Year's Honours, she was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Jacqueline is loved for addressing so many realistic topics in her stories, like adoption, divorce, mental illness, and the care system, topics that many writers have shied away from where children are concerned. For more than 30 years, she has been loved by children worldwide, as well as making an actual difference with her charity work as patron of Momentum, which helps children undergoing cancer treatment. She's also a patron of the Letterbox Club, a book trust initiative. Dame Jacqueline Wilson, everyone.
Thank you very much.
I just have to say, in case I forget to do this in all the excitement, that Jacqueline does have to dash away after this, but she has left book plate signed books that you can purchase afterwards downstairs. She's a busy lady, she's a wanted woman, so she has to go very quickly afterwards. So now to introduce this young lady, Alina Badar. Did I get that right? Yeah. Good. Alina Badar. In 2023, the National Literacy Trust partnered with the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, and the National Poet Laureate, Simon Armitage, to inspire the next generation of young poets in West Yorkshire and appoint the first ever West Yorkshire Young Poet Laureate. The National Literacy Trust is thrilled to announce the return of West Yorkshire Poetry Week as part of the West Yorkshire Young Poet Laureate programme for 24-25, encouraging all schools across the area to get involved with a week-long programme of free activities, class resources and events, including a National Poetry Day to celebrate inspiration of the next generation of young poets in the region. And with that very exciting opportunity, I would like to introduce West Yorkshire Young Laureate Alina Badar, who will now take over and interview Dame Jacqueline Wilson. A big round of applause. Oh gosh. There we go.
So, Jacqueline, I have a few questions.
Okay.
So, which were your favourite books when you were a small girl?
When I was a small girl, I loved Noel Stretfield's books, particularly ballet shoes. I couldn't do ballet. Do you do ballet at all, your sister? No. I didn't let it deter me. I had a pair of pink bedroom slippers. When I was alone in the flat, my mum and dad weren't around to laugh at me. I used to pretend to be a ballet dancer, whirl around the room. I always wanted to be a writer most, but yeah. I loved ballet. I love ballet shoes. I highly recommend it, although it's probably quite dated. Yeah. And I liked a lot of the girly classics. I liked a book called Little Women. I liked What Katie Did. I liked a book called A Little Princess, and I like Mary Poppins too. So which are your favourite books?
Hetty Feather.
Alina's been so tactful. She's picked a Jacqueline Wilson book, which is very sweet of her.
Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
And this is, can you remember who it's by?
Jeff Kinney.
Jeff Kinney, yes. I've never met Jeff Kinney, who does the Wimpy Kid books, but we do share a publisher here.
Yeah.
And the lovely thing about Jeff Kinney, apart from being a brilliant writer and illustrator, is that he has, in America, his own bookshop.
Yeah.
And he says it doesn't really make a profit, but he feels that every community needs its own bookshop. And I think what a wonderful way, to spend. I think he's probably earned quite a lot of money, and I think it's really special. So if ever I get to go to America again, I want to go to Jeff Kinney's bookshop.
So, second question. Where did you get your inspirations for your books Hetty Feather and Tracy Beaker?
Okay. Well, Hetty Feather first. I don't know how many of you made a trip to London? Yeah? Well, okay. There's so much to see in London that it's almost exhausting, and huge museums and wonderful art galleries, plus lots of shops, lots of sights. But there's quite a small museum that you can get to quite easily on the tube. It's not too far from the very centre of London, and it's called the Foundling Museum. And it has all the different artefacts that came from the actual real Foundling Hospital that was started off in the 18th century for the babies that the mums couldn't look after them. And this wonderful person thought, right, let's find a special place where these babies can be brought up. And unfortunately, we have to make allowances for the expectations of this Foundling Hospital. It wasn't for ill children, it was just what it was called. But the girls were trained up until they were 14, and it was good in a way because they were educated, they were taught to read, and a lot of poor children in the 18th and indeed 19th centuries weren't taught to read, and they were reasonably well fed. We would find it quite boring food, but they weren't starving. But then the girls had no option. They were told at 14 you would have to be a servant. And I don't think any of the girls in the audience here would particularly like to leave school at 14 and be a servant and get up at 6 in the morning and work hard all day long and have no time for playing, reading, seeing friends or whatever. So it's a bit sad for the girls. And then the boys, they were brought up in more or less the same way, but they had an option of going into the army. Now, certainly it's a more dangerous life, but more exciting. And then if any of the boys were very, very good at singing, they could also become a special part of the choral society. So I'd read about this, and then I became a patron of the Foundling Hospital, no, the Foundling Museum. And the then director, we were having a nice chat together, and she said, there are lots of things we want you to do. And she said, but most of all, we'd like you to write a book about a foundling child. And I said, well, I've never written a historical book before, but I rather like the idea. And I said, could it be about a girl? Because I kind of prefer writing about girls. Apologies to any boys in the room. I do like boys. I just find it harder to write for them. And I said, could she be a foundling in Victorian times, possibly towards the end of the Victorian times, which I was particularly passionate about? And she said yes. So I thought, okay. And then I thought, what am I going to call my girl? And then my friend at that time, her mum was called Hetty, and it had been a tradition that all the females in her family were called Hetty, starting off from Victorian times. My friend was very, very glad that her own mother, Hetty, called her Christine, which she thought was a nice name. But I thought, I'll call her Hetty. And then I thought she's going to be very little, but very fierce and sparky too. And I thought that one of the nurses in the Foundling Hospital, when she was handed in by her distraught mum because she so wanted to keep her, this nurse would say, "My goodness, this one's not long for this life. She's light as a feather." And then they call her Hetty Feather. And if you go to the Foundling Museum in London, you see a whole wall of different foundlings, and whenever a foundling was handed in, they changed their name, which seems such a strange thing to do. And so Hetty, I thought, would always want to know, and when I was thinking about making up, who her mother was, and wishing she'd had a prettier name, and also she would hate wearing the uniform. It was a very itchy brown costume with a sort of strange pinafore. And then all the girls, when they came in, all you girls with lovely long hair, do you know the first thing that would happen to you? It would be cut off. And it was, I suppose, because a lot of the children had lived in rather dirty dwellings and had nits. You know, sometimes the way at school, even if you've got the cleanest hair ever, you know, nits can go around a class and you have to have that special shampoo. Well, they didn't have special shampoo in those days. They just cut off all the girls' hair. And so when Hetty goes into the Foundling Hospital, she's held down by the nurses and her hair is all shaved off, and then this mop cap goes on her head, and she looks round and there are all these other girls all looking identical. And so I think she decides, right, I'm going to stick being me. I'm not going to become like all these other girls. And so quite quickly, thinking about this, I really enjoyed writing this story. And then there are, gosh, this is a test of my memory. There are many other books about Hetty, because if I've invented a character I really like Hetty or Tracy Beaker, I like to write more books about them. So there's Hetty, and then it's Sapphire Battersea, and then Emerald Star, then Diamond, then Little Stars, and then Hetty also, there's Hetty's Feathers Christmas, and then there's another book called Dancing the Charleston, where you see Hetty when she's about 40, I suppose. So you never know, you might not have seen the last of her. And for Tracy Beaker, my friend fostered children, and I was quite interested in this, and I thought it would be a real challenge to write a book about a child in the care system. And I tell a silly story now, Lena, you'll have to forgive me, but I'd always like to have the name of my character first. And so I thought, right, okay, what's my girl going to be called? And she's going to have a lot of courage and determination. And also I thought she might be a bit naughty, because it's fun to write about naughty children. And so I thought, I want a bouncy name for her. And I thought she wants a name that sort of goes up and down and then up, so in a chirpy way. So I thought Tracy, and I liked that idea. And then I couldn't think of the suitable sort of surname for her. And my daughter Emma at that time, I promise you this is true, in her class at school, she had a friend called Tracy Jelly. And I thought, this is a wonderful name, but it doesn't actually sound real, because Jelly is such an odd name. And then I thought, Tracy Jelly is a very nice, well-behaved little girl. Maybe she wouldn't like to have a name in a book. Maybe her mum wouldn't like it. And so I thought, I need another name. And then I was thinking about this one morning in my bath. Now, I don't know whether you or your sister, when you're having a bath at home, ever sort of just lie back and daydream. I like to do that. And so I was lying back in my bath one morning, and I was still making up the story of Tracy in my head, but I still hadn't got her surname, and I knew I wanted to call the book The Story of Tracy, and then it wouldn't come. So looking around my bathroom, now if everybody thinks about their bathroom at home, not a great place for finding a suitable surname. I mean, Tracy Soap, Tracy Flannel, Tracy Tap, Tracy toothbrush, Tracy toilet. I mean, it just didn't work. So I got on with washing my hair, and in those days, I really didn't have much money. I had a very basic bathroom, didn't have a proper shower at all. So when I washed my hair, I kept an old plastic beaker on the side of the bath, ran the taps, and then when I shampooed my hair, I'd do the hot and cold, and then sluice my hair clean. I just looked at the beaker and thought, Tracy Beaker. And it just seemed to be the right sort of name. So I don't do this with all my characters, but often, I mean, I have a very elaborate shower now, which is lovely, but occasionally when my back's hurting me, I have a bath, and then I lie back in my bath and try and get inspiration all over again. Okay, you've got another question lined up.
Which of your characters are you most like when you were a child?
Well, some journalist really startled me and said, I know exactly who you were like as a child. And I sort of gave him a happy smile. And he said, you're like Dolphin in The Illustrated Mum. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever read The Illustrated Mum, but Dolphin has a very unusual mother who's a bit wild. She has a mental illness, so that she isn't really always taking the greatest care of her daughters. She has got tattoos all over her. She doesn't look after the two girls very well, and Dolphin is the younger of the two, and she's, quite frankly, she's quite grubby around the edges. I wouldn't think she has a bath at all. And her mum has made a dress, a black dress, and she calls it her witchy outfit because she's got sort of silver stars sewn on it, and she thinks it's lovely, but then she won't take it off. She wears it all the time. And so when she goes to school, she does look very strange with sort of matted hair and this grubby dress. And this journalist thought I was like that. I mean, I did in those days wear black, but I like to think I'm quite clean. And also, the most unlike thing is that Dolphin is dyslexic. Do you know what dyslexic means?
Yes, you can't read.
Yes, you can't read, or you can read, but not terribly well. And I can understand what it's like, because if you look at a language like Japanese written down or Arabic, it's so many different symbols that if you're not very carefully and cleverly taught, it's very impossible to read. So I know what it feels like if you open up a book and you just can't make head nor tail of this, and it worries her. And she doesn't have a very nice, caring teacher. I did write it long ago when teachers could sometimes be a bit iffy with children. And so nobody's really sat her down and very gently tried to help her. So, and the thing I love best, and the only things I shone at school were reading and writing, so that, no, I'm not a Dolphin, but I do feel like a mother to Dolphin, and feel quite sorry for her childhood, but still. Okay.
Which three of your characters would you invite to a dinner party, and why?
Right. Well, giving the dinner party, I would have a boy called Biscuits, who crops up in several of my books. He loves his food, as is obvious from his nickname, but in Best Friends, when he pops up, he makes magnificent cakes. And I think, particularly if they were grown up now, I could see Biscuits as a chef, making wonderful dishes, but his absolute, speciality will be making wonderful cakes. So I would have Biscuits making it all and joining us. I'd have to have Tracy Beaker, because, I mean, she loves her food, although she's more a sort of hamburger girl. Who else would I have? I might have the twins from Double Act, Ruby and Garnet. And Can I think of anybody else? Well, it's obvious. I would have Tess from my new book. And then when we'd all had our delicious dinner and we'd let it go down a bit, then Tess, who loves dancing, would give us a little dance all around the dinner table. That'd be fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
What's your fondest childhood memory?
My fondest childhood memory. I wanted a dog very, very much when I was younger. And we lived in a council flat. As my mum always said, it was a better class council flat. But we lived in a council flat, and they were very strict with their rules. You could not have a dog or a cat or a Shetland pony or anything with 4 legs, but you were allowed a goldfish, and you can't cuddle fish, or a budgerigar, and my mum disliked birds, so I didn't have a dog at all. But she did one day buy me at the seaside. There was a toy shop, and there was a dog that looked almost real, like a Pekingese, and possibly I'd been very good that holiday or whatever, or perhaps my mum had just got a bit more money than usual. She bought me that dog. I still have it at home all these many years later. It's all a bit like that. Yeah. And somebody restuffed it, but it didn't go quite right. He doesn't really look like himself, but I still have him, and I always felt very fond of him. So that was a very exciting part of my childhood. But if anybody is in the same situation and for whatever reason you would love a dog but can't have one at the moment, you can always wait until you grow up. I did have to wait quite a long time, but now I'm very happy to say I have 2 dogs. I have Jackson, who's an elderly terrier, and I don't know if any of you have got elderly grandpas who have arthritis. They can be a bit grumpy at times. Well, my dog Jackson is a bit grumpy. And in the Tracy Beaker books, there are later books where Tracy has grown up, and she's got her own daughter, and also in the last one, she fosters daughter. Tracy has a dog called Alfie, who is very similar to my little Jackson. And then in not Star of the Show, in The Girl Who Wasn't There, it was the children's book before Star of the Show, Luna, the main character, is given a little creamy gold Cavapoo puppy called Molly. And guess what? I have a Cavapoo called Molly, who's now 2.5, and absolutely adorable. Some rather unkind people seem to suggest she's a little bit tubby. So unfortunately for Molly, who food is the best thing ever for her, when I get back home after doing all this exciting tour around talking to people, she's going on a diet. And she's so good. She doesn't bark for food or whatever. She looks at you and she's got big brown eyes and she looks like that. And it's so difficult to resist her. But also, I won't get back home till quite late tonight because I live on the south coast. But I know that when I get to the local railway station, my partner will be waiting with Jackson the terrier and Molly. And Jackson will just look up the station platform and go, oh, hello, you back. Molly will go, oh, it's my mum, and leap up. And I get so excited about that. So that's great. Okay.
Do you think technology is ruining the love of reading books?
Do I think what, darling?
Technology is ruining books.
I think it is a bit. I think how many children in the room have either a mobile phone or a gaming device or tablet or whatever? All of you? How many adults? Yes, yes. And I'm not against technology, but on trains now, you don't often see someone reading a book. They are just scrolling on their phone or whatever. And I have particular real hatred of technology at this very moment because the day before last, I was writing something out in the evening on my laptop, being very pleased with myself that I was finishing something off. And then some whole series of weird things happened on my computer. And I don't think I did, but I must have pressed the wrong thing. And it all disappeared. Now, I have a magic man I know called Gary, and I had a gabbled conversation with him yesterday, and he's coming tomorrow, Sunday. But as I was telling him very urgently, he said, sounds bad, very bad. So I don't know what to do. I've got most of my next novel. I actually posted it to my partner so that if I can work with that, but have to do about 10,000 words to finish it off. And there's other bits and pieces too. So it's a bit of a disaster. And I tell you, when I started writing for years, I wrote on a typewriter. And it didn't disappear. It knew its place. It stayed there. So, no, I'm not a friend of the computer. But there we go. One has to use them.
Why are a number of your books based on orphanages or foundling hospitals?
I think it's quite interesting to write about children in some kind of institution. And when I was young, I sometimes liked to read school stories, but much more I like to read, if I could find a story about an orphanage, I like that, or a terrible school. Now, very pertinently for where we are, my favourite of the Bronte children, well, when they were children, was Charlotte, and I loved hearing all about her. And then when I was still only about 10 and I'd run out of books to read at home, my parents had a few classics. I don't think they read them, but one of them was Jane Eyre, which is, the latest story is quite complex and difficult for a 10-year-old, but might be possible. But the first 9 chapters are about Jane Eyre's childhood. And they lived in the Bronte Parsonage just over the way. But then Jane was sent to a school where they had hardly anything to eat, and she was really treated badly. Some of the children were actually whipped, and they were my favourite passages. And I had, look, my Bronte badge on, and it's just, I think still my favourite book of all is Jane Eyre, and so it's just a privilege to come here. And actually, this morning, well, not this morning, early this afternoon, went all around the actual museum, which is such a lovely one. Okay.
And finally, who is your inspiration?
Who is my inspiration? Well, I think today, I didn't know what Alina was going to ask me, it will be Charlotte Bronte, because there's a bit in Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre is very like Charlotte herself. And it says, you know, I may be little and poor and obscure and plain. And I felt I was all those things. And yet she got to be a very, very famous writer. I'm pretty sure there won't be a Jacqueline Wilson museum anywhere. But I think, you know, Charlotte was quite wonderful. And I wrote it down somewhere. Here we go. That when she was, I think, in her late teens, she was desperate to be a writer. All the Brontes wrote all sorts of different books. Tiny, weeny books that you see in the museum, and your eyesight, even with a magnifying glass, you can't read them properly. But she wrote to a poet, Robert Southey, she really admired, and she was hoping, obviously, that he would write back. She sent some of her writing too, that he would be encouraging. And you know what he wrote? Part of it was, literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and it ought not to be. The more she is engaged in her proper duties, wife, mother, running a household, the less leisure she will have for it, which I think is a pretty discouraging thing to say to anyone. But she wrote a very polite but clearly sarcastic letter, and I think in a way it made her more determined than ever to succeed. So I think Charlotte is my inspiration. And have many of you seen those little tiny books that they wrote, all four of the Bronte children? Who can tell me the names of the Bronte children? Anybody venture? Somebody at the back. Can you shout them out? Patrick was the father. So he was the Reverend Patrick Bronte. I'm right, I hope. And then there was Mrs. Bronte, who sadly died young. And then there were the four famous Brontes. There was Charlotte, Branwell, Emily, and Anne. But then actually there had been two other Bronte girls who went to the same horrible school, and they died of TB, and that was Maria and Elizabeth. And people often say that Maria seemed the most talented of all, but we mostly know about Charlotte, Emily, and Anne because poor Branwell, naughty Branwell, whatever, he made a bit of a mess of his life and died young. And but when they were all children, they all made up stories together, and they wrote these little tiny books. And I have experience of writing a little tiny book because if you ever go to Windsor Castle, there is a Queen's doll's house there, which is my favourite bit of Windsor Castle, and I absolutely loved it. And all these different rooms, it's huge, huge doll's house, and you can walk around it. Yeah. And you know, the royal family used to, at Christmas, they used to open it up, and there are cars about that big. But the interesting thing about it, that all different, say winemakers of the time in the 1920s put actual real wine in these little bottles and everything. I loved this doll's house, and the best bit was the library, because they had little books, and in the 1920s, some of the most famous writers and poets were asked if they would actually, these books were about that big, if they would write tiny little things in their own handwriting in these little books, and they would be in the library. And my dad said to me, as we were going round, would you like a little book? Yeah. And I said, yes, please. Like he was actually going to somehow buy me one in the library. But what he meant was the sort of catalogue about the library, which was still very nice, but not the same. And yet, for this year is the centenary of the Doll's House, and our new Queen, Queen Camilla, commissioned 20 different authors to write new little books to go in a glass cabinet beside the Doll's House. And I was one of them that got asked. And so nobody can look at it because it's behind the glass cabinet. But I wrote a story about a little mouse who actually gets into the Queen's doll's house and tries out all the beds, but then finds the linen cupboard the most cosy of all, and she scampers around and gets up to all sorts of things. She actually even drinks out of the real wine out of one of the bottles and then has to retire quickly because she feels so dizzy. And I loved making up this story. And then when it was bound, this lovely lady who did the binding, she's done it in very bright colours with the mouse on the front, and then she's done tiny little nibble marks on the edge as if the mouse itself has actually done this. So I thought that I never ever get anything of mine like that in a royal castle, but it's still there. I think they've only got plans for this year, so I don't know what they'll do with it afterwards, but still. But I thought what I would do, because I'm fascinated by little books, the day before yesterday when I was at home, look, I've made a little tiny book, and I thought some of you might like to make one like this. It's terribly easy. I mean, this is just a little one, in that you just cut out this shape of paper, little rectangles, all more or less the same, and then you put them together like that and then just fold it over. You can do without the binding. And this is a potted version of this new book, Star the Show. And so it says, here, you read that bit out.
I'm Tess.
There we go. So there's a picture of her doing her ballet dancing. And she says,
I have 2 brothers and 2 little sisters.
Yes, and then this one.
Ada is just a baby.
Yeah, so there's a little picture of the baby there. And then there's a picture of the big brother and the little brother she doesn't like, and I managed to make him scowl. And then, and her big sister, who's a bit bossy, and they all have to fend for themselves because their mum has died. Since we're talking about a lot of dead mothers today, and dad has gone off entirely. And then Tess thinks, how can she actually make some money? And she loves dancing. She's not a trained dancer, but she is very graceful. And she says, I know how I'm going to earn money. I'm going to be in a pantomime. And Victorian pantomimes were very, very elaborate affairs. And I know there's a theatre still in Keighley and also one in Bradford of the more old-fashioned sort, so that you can imagine it. And here she's dressed up. What's she dressed up as?
I am a mouse.
Yes, and she's got big ears and whiskers for the pantomime, because it's Cinderella, the pantomime, and there are mice and rats in that. And then she says,
And a beautiful fairy, and I end up being the star of the show.
There we go. So I tell you what, you've done such a good job answering questions. That's your little book. There we go. Well done, Alina.
So we want to go to the audience in a minute, because I've got a feeling we're going to have a few questions. But if you maybe want to, Alina, do just 2 from, these were gathered from social media, so 2 questions from there if you want on that list. Any that you like.
Which book, if any, changed the most drastically during the writing process?
Which book? What?
Which book, if any, changed the most drastically?
I see. A book of mine called My Sister Jodie, which, has anybody read My Sister Jodie? Did it make you cry a bit at the end? Jodie wasn't supposed to end up like that at all. But as I wrote it, I kept feeling, I know what's going to happen. Because I don't plan out my books absolutely chapter by chapter. I just have a very vague idea, but I like to keep on amusing myself, finding out about things. And then it was almost as if my fingers took over, and instead of the book that I thought I would be writing, it became much more sad. And then when I was out and about giving talks promoting it, many children told me it made them cry. And I said, I'm so sorry. And I felt really guilty about it. But they mostly said, we liked crying. We like sad books. I thought, phew, thank goodness for that. And
the second one, what advice would you give to children on how to start their own writing?
Okay, who here would like to be a writer and loves writing stories? Right. I think for the children, the wonderful thing is you can write for fun. During school time, you have to write stories the way the teacher suggests, and you generally have to plan it all out. And then if you've done it, but the teacher maybe thinks you've done it a bit too quickly or a bit rambly, you might have to do it all over again. Well, actually, professional writers, that's exactly what happens. Only we don't have teachers, we have editors. But I find it very tedious doing it all over again. Though I will have to this time, possibly, if my Gary can't mend my computer. But I think if you're writing for fun, then you can have whatever device you like to write on, or an old-fashioned notebook and pen. Just think of a character, think what they might be like, think what might happen to them if they walk down the street and suddenly, and then think, what is going to happen next? So it's a little start, and then you can write the story. And I wouldn't try to write very formally, as if you would if you were writing a very important letter to somebody. I would imagine that you're writing to or talking to your best friend, and so sort of relax and just tell the story the way you want to, and just enjoy writing, and never mind if you don't finish it, because I hardly ever finished a story when I was your age, I have to say. Now, with your poems, do you ever abandon the poem, or can you get right through to the end?
I normally get right through to the end. I plan it, then I write a few lines, and then I finish off.
I think I can't write poetry. I wish I could. I can't. But I think you have to be much more aware of the structure of it. But with stories, you can write a while and then get a bit fed up with it and think, nah, start another one. However, as you get older, and if you want to write as an adult, starting is the most important thing, because so many people have told me, I'd love to be a writer, I wish I could be a writer, I haven't got time at the moment, but. And I think if you even wrote for 15 minutes a day, maybe set the alarm 15 minutes early, and just wrote for 15 minutes a day, every day, at the end of a year, you would have written probably 2 full-length books, so that it's just not necessarily thinking you've got to sit down and write for hours and hours, just write when you can, but then write the next day you'll probably, oh, I don't want to write this, but make yourself write it and carry on like that. And then with a bit of luck, instead of sitting down and thinking, oh, you might think, oh yes, I really want to write this bit, and then just hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just stay in the microphone for a second? Okay, does anybody in the audience have a question? Okay, start there.
I'd love to hear you speaking. My question was, you've had such a wonderful career and inspired so many children and adults. What would you say, or how would you say you've been able to keep relevant over the changing everything?
Well, it's weird because for a long time, about 15 years, I was getting published of me. And I wasn't in most bookshops at all. And then I think it was probably Tracy Beaker helped a lot, the television series helped a lot, and then things got better. And then I had a lovely time up here when everything I wrote seemed to be reasonably popular, and I was very, very happy. But then suddenly I seemed to be sliding down a bit and down a bit. But I've just recently, very recently, have published an adult novel, and then suddenly it's, to my immense surprise and joy, done really well. So that mostly people's careers, if they're lucky, they go up, and then they sort of plateau, and then inevitably, because possibly they're not so relevant to their audience, it tipples down a bit. But mine is up, down, up again. So I'm really delighted to do that, and try very hard with both my children's books and this adult book to try to imagine what it would be like to be, well, I think quite easily imagine what it's like to be a 10-year-old. I had to struggle a bit harder in the adult book to imagine what it's like to be a 40-year-old, but I hope I've got there. And life has changed so much. I'm sure some of the older members of the audience, if you look back to your own childhoods, how life has changed, attitudes have changed, some for the absolute better, some for the total worse. But it's very interesting, but I can't just automatically write about people at different stages of their life without thinking very hard about some of the things that obsessed me when I was young. Females have got over that sort of thing and standing up for themselves more, which I think is very positive and lovely. And yet there's a lot more stress in the world now, particularly after the pandemic. So if you're writing a book where it's meant to be set in present times, you've got to keep remembering that, no, that was like school was when I was young and my daughter was young, and school is so different now. So it's still hard work, but it's worth it when it comes off.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
What is an average day of your life like?
I get up, I take the dogs out into the garden for obvious reasons, feed the cat, my partner takes the dog for a walk, I hop back into bed with a cup of coffee in my pajamas, start writing, pause for a bit of breakfast and then start writing again. And if I can manage 1,000 words of whatever I'm currently writing, that's nice. Then I can get up and start my day. And then there's all the emails and there's the rewritings and the preparation for different things and phone calls from people, so that it isn't as if I'm not working during the rest of the day, but generally there's time for a nice longer walk with the dogs or to see friends or something. And in the evening, I just flop and watch a bit of telly.
Just the boy at the back there.
How long have you been writing for, and how many books do you make a year?
I've been writing, I had my first short story published when I was 17, and I've been technically earning my living as a writer, although not very much money for a long, long time, all the way around till now. Note, I'm being a bit coy, not saying exactly how long I've been writing, partly because I'm bad at mental arithmetic and partly because I don't want to announce my extreme old age. And I do not know how many books I have written. This might be my 119th, but somebody was arguing with me the other day, no, it's more than that. I'm not sure I could summon up all my books, but over 100 sounds fine. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hi Jacqueline, it's been fantastic to hear you speak. And what's one of your favourite things about being an author?
My favourite things about being an author are writing the end, the end of something. I love to come out and talk about my books because it's so interesting to see what people have got to ask. And also, to be honest, it's a bit of an ego trip, isn't it? It's delightful. I'm like two people. I'm quite an introvert at home, and I just sit and I write, and I see my friends, but, you know, I'm not rushing out and doing all sorts of things all the time. But then when I've got a book to promote, or there's a very special literary festival like this one, I come out, I see lots of people, I meet new people, and it's just marvellous. So although it's blooming hard work a lot of the time, it's really the best job ever. And that's why I'm so happy to be a writer.
Anyone else? This lady.
I just resonate with you so much because I read going there when I was 10.
Really?
Yes, and Charlotte has been my favourite ever since, and my eldest daughter, Charlotte, who grew up on your books, so which is lovely. So what I'd like to ask you really is if you could ever meet Charlotte Bronte, what would you say to her?
Oh, gosh. Now, I would be terrified of meeting Emily Bronte, and I think they were at some dinner with Thackeray, and Emily was so shy or so bored or whatever, she actually turned around and turned her back on everybody. Charlotte had a little bit more sort of wanting to get accepted, gloried in talking to writers. I think she was rather overwhelmed by some of the raconteurs, particularly the men in 19th century literary circles. I think I might, because I've read about her a lot and read her letters and everything, I might know the subjects that might get her going. And I think that's the secret. When she would be very shy at first, I would be very shy at first, but I think we get over it, and how exciting it would be. So in my dreams, literally.
Thank you. Lady Who.
Yeah, you'll be a reader as well as a writer. Is there anything in particular this year that you've read that you've enjoyed?
For children, there's a book called Impossible Creatures by Catherine Rundell. I've loved all her books. This is the first in a trilogy, a series of 3 books. It's wonderful, it's exciting, it's magical, it's for girls and boys. It's easy to read, but it's beautifully written. I think, she's one of our best children's writers ever. The favourite of my books that I've read this year, adult novels, is by David Nichols, and it's You Are Here. And it's the loveliest story, very easy to read, but beautifully written, of 2 very unlikely couples that are a couple, but they're not a couple. They go on a walk with some other people from one side of the country to the other. It's a famous walk, and famous for being very, very wet, very windy, very hard going. And it's just the way they connect on this journey. It's very, very funny, but it's quite moving, and you want everything to work out for them, and it doesn't seem as if it's going to. And for those of you that can't stand sentimental romance, it's not sentimental, and it's not really romantic. It's just funny and tender and gorgeous. And that really sounds as if I'm in love with David Nichols, don't I? But it's a smashing read, it really is.
Right, we can do one more, and maybe from a child. Right, the little girl on the end there. Yes, you.
What has been your favourite book to write?
It's so difficult because there have been so many different ones, but I do think not just because it's the book that I'm talking about at the moment, Star of the Show, it's because it's a Victorian book, and if I were writing about this family in modern times, you couldn't have a family of children living by themselves, going not out to work, but doing different things, like the older sister takes in washing, the older brother sells china at a market. Tess herself, at the age of about 8, is in a Victorian pantomime and staying up late at night. These sorts of things wouldn't happen now, but that's the wonderful thing about Victorian times. And you see, I can't worry about, have I got the slang right? Have I got the latest thing on TikTok right or whatever? Because nobody really knows what Victorian life was like, no matter how many books you've read of the period. And so I can let myself go and enjoy it. And I was very fond of these characters, particularly little Tess. And in actual fact, remember I said that Ballet Shoes was my favourite book, and I didn't do ballet but danced around. Well, I think when I was writing Star of the Show, in my head, I was being Tess, dancing around like that. So that's my favourite. But ask me next year and I'll probably have a different favourite.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for the wonderful questions. And first of all, a big round of applause for Alina. And also for Jacqueline for sharing so many insights and real life stories. It's just been a magical afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to Louise, who's actually structured this whole event so well. And Alina and I could have just sit back and sort of do what we're told, which was so lovely.
So thank you everybody once again for coming. Thank you.